Howdy folks, and welcome to another Taste of Gameplay video. This time the Tier 1 Pan-Asian Tech Tree Cruiser, the Chengan. I guess I didn't really need to say Tech Tree or Cruiser because that's all there is at Tier 1. Yes, I realize it's a tough sell to watch 13 to 14 minutes of a Tier 1 gameplay video, but this is what came up randomly, and I just really want to do every ship in the game. And also, I think there's some things to be learned here. I think it's good to have a sample of 2025 Tier 1 gameplay for posterity, because I think it's probably very, very different than in the early years of the game. Pretty much at Tier 1, what you can expect these days is a 3 to 5 minute wait, and usually only one player on the opposing team. I've had as many as 2 or 3 during peak times, or just because someone happens to queue up, but usually it's pretty much a duel. It's just you versus one other guy on the enemy team, and each of you have 11 almost useless damage sponge bot friends to get through. But that doesn't mean it's not interesting, and I'm going to get into some of that. I did a little bit of an edit here because, you know, nothing interesting happened. So I'll talk a little bit about the Chengan specifically. It's my second favorite Tier 1 ship. My absolute favorite is the Hermelin, but I think the Chengan is a close second. It's also a good ship. Most of the ships at Tier 1 are pretty similar to each other. You know, they all only have HE. There's some interesting things about Tier 1. Every gun penetrates essentially every other ship, with the exception, I believe, only of the Hermelin, which is one reason I like it. It has a special armor plate on the side. I gather that in the early days of the game there used to be some differences between the ships. Some of them might have even had AP, but these days they're all basically the same, which is appropriate. I mean, it's kind of a training simulator. The Chengan, what differentiates the Chengan, it has pretty good alpha on its guns, 1155, which might not seem like much, but that's pretty good at this tier. The reload is still okay, it's 5.5 seconds. Dispersion's not terribly good, but the guns hit pretty hard for this tier. And it's very small, which is super handy against enemy players. It doesn't really matter too much against bots, because their aim is so bad anyway, but against enemy players I find that the Chengan, it's the main advantage it has over the Hermelin. The Hermelin is quite large, the Chengan is really small. But the downsides are it's very slow and has a really bad small HP pool. Anyway, I showed you the beginning of the game. I wanted to keep some of that in because you saw I spawned all the way over on the flank, but I immediately headed for our cap zone. Of course, that's something you would never do at higher tiers, but with this tier I've found that it's a really good strategy, and I think the reason why is because all the bots are going to basically head for your cap zone, and so you get basically a target-rich environment where you can just keep shooting 100% of the time, and that's rule number 1 at Tier 1. You always want to be shooting. You want to be shooting and doing damage, usually at a bot, 100% of the time, literally on cooldown. Part of the name of the game, if you're playing against a player that's even halfway good, is just who can chew through all the HP of the bots on the enemy team the fastest. The other good thing about occupying your cap zone is any second, any tick that you can keep your cap zone clear of enemy ships and the other side doesn't do that, you get basically 2 free bonus points. And points don't come into Tier 1 often, maybe 15-20% of the games, but when they do, a pretty common strategy, which is admittedly a little cheesy and sometimes kind of boring, is if you're winning, sometimes you'll end up against a player that's just a really good shot, or he gets lucky, or both, and you just end up on way lower HP than he does. And in those cases, I mean, obviously one option if you want is to just lose the game intentionally by getting into a duel with him, but if your aim is to win, then a strategy that can work is to just sail all the way into the corner. Because at this tier, it's you just can't catch anybody, and the guns are really short range. And oftentimes what happens is the enemy player doesn't realize the danger he's in until it's just too late. And, you know, best case scenario then, even if you do decide to stand and fight with him, he's now pushing into you because he has to go into your cap zone because you have more points than he does. Anyway, most of the time that doesn't matter. Most of the time you end up winning. Sometimes I've had games where if the enemy player isn't paying any attention at all, you actually just cap. You cap and win. Tier 1 games are always standard games, which means if you cap the enemy zone, you just instantly win. And I have that happen probably 25%, 20 to 25% of games. I just cap out. Because if the other player doesn't realize how the game works or just isn't paying attention and is having fun shooting bots, which I get. There's another advantage to that strategy of staying in your zone, which is it lets the other player have fun. You know, I might be accused of seal clubbing at this tier, and I think that's fair. Though I find, on that note, that most of the time the players I'm playing against are also pretty experienced. There's very few true beginners, and even the real beginners, they don't stay at tier 1 for very long. And I think the game gives them special bot games at tier 1 if they truly are a brand new account. Anyway, point is, you know, in this game, the enemy player is going to do well, but I think I might have more games than he does and a little more skill, at least a little better aim. But he still gets to play the game. He still gets to have fun. I'm going to win, but I'm not going to attack him until the very end of the game when I have no other targets left. And I just think that's more pleasant. He's actually going to even compliment me, which is really nice of him. But yeah, I always find it a little bit sweaty, try-hardy when I get into these tier 1 games and the enemy player just goes straight for me. I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad strategy. Maybe it works sometimes, but it's just kind of cheesy and a little bit mean. Or I mean, it's a game and you're trying to win. I get that, but it's just, yeah, I don't know. I don't do that at tier 1. Anyway, the Chengan, yeah. Like I said, my second favorite ship. Again, mostly it comes down to the physical size of the ship. It's just kind of hard to hit, and that to me is an advantage worth having. The downside of the lower HP pool, you know, I mean, that only matters if you get hit. But yeah, I don't play tier 1 very often, of course. Sometimes I will do this thing where I will just decide to sit down and play all the tiers in order. Usually I start at tier 1 and then I go all the way through one game at each tier, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then super ships. I usually play a ship that I like and just see how many of them I can win. Kind of keeps it fresh. I do find that the different tiers have different play styles, and that can be fun. Sometimes, you know, tier 10 can get a little stale. I sincerely wish that, you know, Wargaming would do something with the low tiers, especially I would say like tier 1, 2, and 3. Tier 4 can still have some players in it, and tier 5 definitely has players in it. And then once you get to tier 6, there's no bots at all. So, you know, it's either long queues or players. And I understand why they introduced bots into low tier games. Otherwise, there would be literally no way for actual new players to play. No one's going to wait long enough for a 12 on 12 or 9 on 9 or even 6 on 6 tier 1 game. I don't know how long that would take for Matchmaker to give you that, but maybe they need to make tiers 1, 2, and 3 more interesting for players somehow. I don't know. But I do think that these low tiers can be fun, actually. I mean, they're not, obviously they're easier in a sense. There's less going on, there's less to think about, there's less rules because there's less, you know, maybe you don't have torpedoes, you don't have AP. but I wouldn't say there's no challenge. I think the challenge is just very different. In a way, the simplicity of it focuses the mind and makes you really have to think about things like, for example, distributing your damage and your shots among different parts of the enemy ship to maximize the damage. You could really see that at tier 1. I'll do 1200 damage to a ship, and then if I shoot at the same spot, I do 600 damage. Whereas if I move to the back of the ship, I do 1200 damage again for one more salvo. And since at this tier, it may not take that many salvos to kill an enemy ship, you know, that can be pretty impactful. And positioning is still important. I mean, there's some basics that still hold true, not so much against bots. It doesn't really matter because they can't hit the broadside of a barn. But in terms of fighting enemy players, things like being able to shoot over islands and not be spotted, that's still very relevant at this tier. Being able to juke and dodge is still a thing, especially at longer ranges. So, you know, I mean, it's not that there's no skill involved at tier 1. I think there very much is. The games are slower, which, you know, could be good or bad, just depending on how you look at it. But it does let you spend more time thinking about what you're doing. Yeah, it's a lot harder to surprise people, and even when you do, you're not going to depth strike anybody, right? It's just not a thing. So yeah, the pace of the game moves a little slower. So I think we're finally down to him and me. And I mean, you see, I have a couple of advantages. Of course, one problem is he's 2 bots behind, if you want to look at it that way. I'm 2 bots ahead of him. But also, on top of that, he's lost more health. That mostly comes down to him just staying way too close to the enemy bots. That's the only time they ever hit you. But then also I'm 260 points ahead. Now, of course, some of that's because he will get points for these last 2 kills, but that's not all. I've been collecting points pretty steadily all game, and he mostly has not. But yeah, I was kind of tempted to just let him shoot more at the enemies, but at some point, I mean, it is a multiplayer game, and you got to get on with things, right? So yeah, that's tier 1, and that's the Chengan Pan-Asian. Obviously, the thought of whether to buy the ship or not doesn't enter into it because they're free at tier 1. But just in terms of, you know, if you have any interest playing at tier 1, I would say this and the Hermelin, which is actually, there's sort of like opposite ends of the spectrum. There are some tier 1 ships that I don't think are very good. I tried the Black Swan once and can't get excited about that one. But in general, most of them are pretty much the same, pretty similar. Yeah, so that's about it for the Chengan. Yeah, let's see the final results here. I think I got a surprising amount of experience. Obviously, you're going to get less. You know, you don't get credit for missions. That's one huge problem. But I got, yeah, something like 1,200 experience. And a ton of damage. Obviously, a good way to boost your PR numbers. Yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.